It was soon arranged that Mr. Roberts would drive Twilight round to Granger's farm the next morning. "That gives us time to buy everything we need and get the paddock and stable ready," Mrs. Foster said to Lauren. On the way home, Lauren and her mum drove to the local tax store on the outskirts of the town. The sales assistant, a girl called Jenny, was very helpful. Soon there were loads of horsey things on the counter. Brushes, a first aid kit, feed buckets, a halter. The pile grew bigger and bigger until, at last, Lauren had everything she needed. Jenny helped them pack everything into their car. "Have fun with your new pony," she called to Lauren. Lauren grinned at her. "Thanks, I will." As Jenny went back to the store, Lauren noticed a small bookshop tucked between the tack store and a shop selling electrical goods. It had an old-fashioned brown and gold sign over the window saying, "Mrs. Fontana's new and used books." "Look at that bookshop, Mum," she said. "Shall we take a look inside?" Mrs. Foster asked. Lauren nodded eagerly. Both she and her mum loved bookshops, and this one looked really interesting. They walked along the pavement. Through the glass panel in the door, Lauren could see a cheerful rose-patterned carpet and shelves of books. Mrs. Foster pushed the door open. A bell tinkled, and they stepped inside. "Wow," Lauren said, looking around. There were books everywhere. Old books, new books, and not just on the shelves. There were piles of books next to the shelves, and more piles in front of those. But enough space had been left for a few chairs to be placed around a pretty iron fireplace. A large notice said, "Please feel free to browse and sit a while." It was the strangest, loveliest bookshop that Lauren had ever been in. Just then, there was a pattering of feet, and a little white terrier dog with a black patch over one eye came trotting up to them. "Look, Mum!" Lauren exclaimed. She crouched down, and the terrier licked her hand. Mrs. Foster bent down to stroke him. "Hi, little one," she smiled. "Oh, isn't he cute?" said Lauren. "Ah, I see you've met Walter." Lauren and her mum looked up. An elderly lady was coming towards them. She was wearing an embroidered shawl over a flowery dress. Lauren gasped. It was the lady she'd met at the horse sale earlier. There was no mistaking the warm blue eyes. "Hello, Lauren." The lady smiled. "You two know each other?" Lauren's mother said, looking surprised. "We met at the horse and pony sale this morning," the lady explained. She held out her hand. "I'm Mrs. Fontana," she said. "This is my shop." "Alice Foster," Lauren's mum said, shaking hands. "We've just moved into the area. Is it okay if we have a look around?" "Feel free," Mrs. Fontana replied. She smiled at Lauren. "There are lots of books in the side room you might like." Leaving her mum to browse, Lauren made her way to the side of the shop. The next room was full of children's books. There were no bright posters or colourful displays like there were in most bookshops, but there were lots of plump, soft cushions on the floor and a big table piled high with all kinds of books. Lauren examined each pile and quickly picked out a collection of pony stories. She sat down on one of the cushions and started to read. Suddenly, she heard the patter of paws coming towards her. It was Walter the terrier. He sat down beside Lauren and looked at her, his head cocked on one side. Lauren tickled him under the chin. "He likes you," Mrs. Fontana said. Lauren jumped. The old lady seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. She smiled at Lauren. "So, what have you chosen, my dear?" Feeling slightly shy, Lauren showed Mrs. Fontana the book of pony stories. "I thought you might like those," Mrs. Fontana said, raising her bright eyes to Lauren's face. "Did you find your pony today?" "I certainly did," Lauren nodded excitedly. "He's coming tomorrow. He's called Twilight, and he's wonderful," she said. Mrs. Fontana stared at her for a moment, and then she swung around. "You know what?" she said. "I think I might have just the thing for you. It's up here." Lauren watched as Mrs. Fontana fetched a folding step-ladder and stood on it to reach the top shelf. "Here we are," the old lady said, pulling out a dusty purple book. She climbed down the ladder and handed the book to Lauren.